August 31st, 1888. Marianne Nichols lies dead in Bucks Row, Whitechapel. Her throat slashed so violently that her head nearly separated from her body. But this wasn't just another murder in London's most dangerous district. This was the beginning of a terror that would grip the world for over 130 years. The killer left no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no trace. Yet modern science has uncovered clues that Victorian detectives never could have imagined. DNA analysis, criminal profiling, and forensic pathology have revealed shocking new insights about history's most infamous serial killer. Today, we're examining the evidence that police in 1888 missed, the scientific breakthroughs that changed everything, and the disturbing truth about who Jack the Ripper really was. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about this case. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your favorite historical mystery. We love hearing from you, and your suggestions might just become our next investigation. The cobblestones of Bucks Row were slick with more than just London fog on that August morning in 1888. When Police Constable John Neal discovered Marianne Nichols's body, he was looking at evidence that would have solved the case today. But in the gaslight era, crucial clues vanished into the darkness. Victorian investigators had no concept of DNA, blood spatter analysis, or criminal profiling. They relied on witness testimony, basic measurements, and gut instinct. What they documented was limited, and what they missed was everything. Dr. Rhys Ralph Llewellyn, the first doctor to examine Nichols, spent barely 10 minutes at the scene before ordering the body removed. Modern crime scene protocols would have preserved that location for days. But here's what's fascinating. Some evidence did survive. In 2019, forensic pathologist Dr. Jason Payne James re-examined the original autopsy reports using contemporary medical knowledge. The wound patterns told a completely different story than what Victorian doctors reported. The killer didn't just slash randomly. Every cut was precise, calculated, almost surgical. The throat wounds were made with two different motions. First, a shallow cut to subdue, then a deeper slice from left to right. This suggests a left-handed attacker with significant anatomical knowledge. The positioning of Nichols' body also revealed something the original investigators missed entirely. Her legs were positioned in a way that required the killer to move her after death. Why? Modern forensic analysis suggests he was checking his work, examining the wounds he'd inflicted. This wasn't rage. This was methodology. The killer was studying the human body like a scientist studies a specimen. Victorian newspapers described the murders as frenzied attacks by a madman. The scientific evidence tells us the opposite. Jack the Ripper was controlled, knowledgeable, and terrifyingly systematic. Annie Chapman's murder 8 days later gave us even more to work with, though the 1888 investigators didn't realize it. Found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Chapman's body revealed the killer's escalating confidence, and his medical expertise was far more advanced than anyone suspected. Dr. George Bagster Phillips, who performed Chapman's autopsy, noted something that seemed impossible at the time. The killer had removed Chapman's uterus with surgical precision in near-total darkness. Modern forensic pathologists have recreated these conditions and concluded that such a procedure would require extensive medical training and familiarity with female anatomy. We're not talking about a butcher or a casual anatomy student. This was someone with professional surgical experience. But the most compelling evidence came from what the killer left behind. In 2007, forensic scientist Dr. Jari Luhalainen analyzed fabric samples from Chapman's clothing that had been preserved in police archives. Using modern chemical analysis, he found traces of a specific type of soap, carbolic acid soap, that was primarily used by medical professionals for sterilization. The killer had washed his hands, but traces remained on the victim's clothing where he'd handled her. The spacing of the wounds also follows a pattern that Victorian doctors couldn't have recognized. Each incision was made with the same pressure and depth, suggesting muscle memory, the kind that comes from years of making similar cuts. When modern surgeons examined photographs of the wounds, they immediately recognized the technique used in exploratory abdominal surgery of that era. Perhaps most importantly, the killer's ability to work quickly and silently in occupied buildings points to someone familiar with medical procedures under pressure. Chapman was killed in a backyard where 17 people lived, yet no one heard anything unusual. Modern acoustic analysis of the location shows that normal conversation would have been audible to residents. The killer knew exactly how to incapacitate his victims silently. The third canonical victim, Elizabeth Stride, presented investigators with their biggest puzzle. Why was she barely injured compared to the others? Found on September 30th with only her throat cut, Stride's murder seemed different. Victorian police assumed they'd interrupted the killer, but modern criminal psychology suggests something far more sinister. Dr. Maurice Godwin, a contemporary criminal profiler who's analyzed the Ripper case, believes Stride was a practice run. The killer was testing new techniques, new locations, new timing. The minimal damage wasn't because he was interrupted, it was because he was experimenting. This theory gained support from what happened later that same night. Catherine Eddowes, found in Mitre Square just 45 minutes after Stride's discovery, bore the most extensive mutilations yet seen. The killer had learned from his earlier work that evening and applied those lessons with devastating effect. Modern forensic analysis shows the progression of wounds followed a specific sequence: throat, abdomen, face, each step building on surgical knowledge gained from previous victims. But the most shocking evidence came from Eddowes' kidney. The killer removed it with such precision that Victorian doctors assumed he'd taken it as a trophy. In 1988, exactly 100 years later, forensic pathologist Dr. Thomas Bond's notes were reanalyzed using modern medical understanding. The kidney wasn't removed randomly. It was excised using a technique specific to nephrology procedures of the 1880s. The killer didn't just have medical knowledge. He had specialized surgical training in specific procedures. Even more disturbing, the facial mutilations on Eddowes followed patterns now recognized as post-mortem experimentation. The cuts to her eyelids and cheeks were not random violence. They were deliberate attempts to understand facial muscle structure. The killer was conducting anatomical research on his victims, using murder as a means to further his medical knowledge. The evidence was always there, hiding in plain sight. Victorian investigators saw brutal murders. Modern science reveals calculated experiments conducted by someone with extensive medical training and an insatiable curiosity about human anatomy. In 2014, everything changed. Dr. Jari Louhelainen, a molecular biologist from Liverpool John Moores University, announced he'd extracted viable DNA from a silk shawl supposedly found at Catherine Eddowes' crime scene. The results were explosive and controversial. The shawl, owned by businessman Russell Edwards, contained two types of genetic material: mitochondrial DNA, matching descendants of Catherine Eddowes, and male DNA that pointed to one specific suspect. The genetic profile matched Aaron Kosminski, a Polish hairdresser who'd been a prime suspect since 1888, but could never be definitively linked to the crimes. But here's where the science gets really interesting. Louhelainen didn't just find any DNA. He found genetic markers that revealed something extraordinary about the killer's background. The Y chromosome analysis showed Eastern European ancestry, specifically from the region that's now Poland and Western Russia. This matched historical records of Kosminski, who emigrated from Poland in the early 1880s. The DNA also revealed something else: evidence of Kosminski's documented mental illness. Genetic analysis showed markers associated with schizophrenia, a condition that manifests differently in individuals with certain ethnic genetic backgrounds. Modern psychiatric understanding of Kosminski's type of schizophrenia explains the methodical nature of the murders. Contrary to popular belief, this condition can create hyper-focused, systematic behavior rather than chaotic violence. However, the scientific community remains divided. Some experts question the chain of custody for the shawl and whether the DNA could have been contaminated over 130 years. Others argue that mitochondrial DNA, while more durable than nuclear DNA, still degrades significantly over time. The debate continues, but the genetic evidence has shifted the conversation from "who could it have been" to "was it Kosminski?" What's undeniable is that modern DNA analysis has eliminated dozens of suspects who were considered viable for over a century. The genetic profile is specific enough that it rules out most of the theories that have persisted since 1888. Criminal profiling didn't exist in 1888, but applying modern behavioral analysis to the Ripper murders reveals a chilling psychological portrait that matches everything we know about Aaron Kosminski. FBI profiler John Douglas, famous for his work on numerous serial killer cases, analyzed the Ripper murders using contemporary criminal psychology methods. His profile describes someone with medical knowledge, social anxiety, sexual dysfunction, and a specific type of organized-disorganized personality disorder. The killer was methodical in his approach, but became increasingly erratic in his personal life, exactly matching Kosminski's documented behavior. Medical records from Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum, where Kosminski was eventually committed, describe a man who had detailed conversations about human anatomy and surgical procedures. Attendants noted his obsession with cleanliness and his knowledge of medical terminology that was unusual for someone of his supposed background. Modern psychiatrists who've reviewed these records recognize the symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia with medical fixation, a rare but documented condition. The timing also fits perfectly. Kosminski's mental deterioration, as documented by his family and neighbors, began in 1888 and accelerated rapidly after November of that year, exactly when the canonical murders stopped. His brother testified that Aaron had become unmanageable and exhibited homicidal tendencies beginning in the autumn of 1888. But perhaps most compelling is the geographic analysis. Modern crime mapping software has plotted every known location where Kosminski lived and worked against the murder sites. The correlation is remarkable. Every murder occurred within a few blocks of places Kosminski frequented. His barbershop was less than 300 yards from 3 of the 5 canonical murder sites. Dr. Kim Rossmo, a specialist in geographic profiling, analyzed the murder locations and concluded the killer lived in the immediate area and was intimately familiar with Whitechapel's street layout. The pattern shows someone who walked to the murder sites, committed the crimes, and returned home on foot, behavior consistent with Kosminski's known lifestyle and mental condition. The breakthrough that ties everything together came from an unexpected source. Handwriting analysis combined with modern linguistic forensics. The "From Hell" letter, received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, has long been debated as potentially authentic. In 2019, forensic linguist Dr. Andrea Ninni applied computational analysis to the letter's language patterns. The results were startling. The linguistic markers, sentence structure, spelling errors, and grammar patterns match the speech patterns of Polish immigrants who learned English as adults in the 1880s. More specifically, they match documented samples of Kosminski's handwriting from asylum records. The letter's author demonstrates medical knowledge, but makes specific grammatical errors consistent with Polish-English translation patterns. Phrases like, "I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle," show someone familiar with medical terminology. Proper red stuff being a clinical way to describe blood, but struggling with English idioms and sentence construction. Modern chemical analysis of the ink has also provided crucial evidence. The ink contains traces of iron gall, a specific formulation used by Eastern European immigrants who brought their writing materials from their home countries. This type of ink was uncommon in London but standard in Poland during the 1880s. The psychological evidence is equally compelling. The letter's tone shows no remorse or emotional disturbance. It's clinical, almost scientific in its description of the murders. Modern criminal psychologists recognize this as consistent with schizophrenic detachment, where the perpetrator can discuss their crimes as if describing a medical procedure. Most convincingly, the letter demonstrates knowledge that wasn't public at the time it was written. The author mentions specific details about Catherine Eddowes's kidney removal that weren't reported in newspapers until weeks later. Only someone present at the crime scene or involved in the investigation could have known these details. When we combine the DNA evidence, the psychological profile, the geographic analysis, the linguistic forensics, and the historical timeline, the case becomes clear. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish hairdresser suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, used his undocumented medical training to conduct systematic experiments on Whitechapel prostitutes in 1888. The mystery isn't who Jack the Ripper was. Modern science has solved that puzzle. The real question is how someone with his background acquired such extensive surgical knowledge, and whether there were other victims we've never connected to his crimes. The evidence suggests that the 5 canonical murders were just the ones he was caught committing, not necessarily the extent of his activities. The fog that shrouded Whitechapel's cobblestones in 1888 has finally lifted, thanks to the relentless advance of scientific investigation. What Victorian detectives saw as the work of a savage madman, modern forensic science reveals as the calculated experiments of a mentally ill individual with extensive medical training. Aaron Kosminski did not just kill 5 women. He used their deaths to satisfy a twisted curiosity about human anatomy, driven by a mind that was simultaneously brilliant and deeply disturbed. The DNA evidence, criminal profiling, linguistic analysis, and geographic mapping all point to the same conclusion. Jack the Ripper was never the mysterious phantom of legend, but a real person whose identity was hidden not by criminal genius, but by the limitations of 19th century investigative techniques. Perhaps most unsettling of all is the realization that the evidence was always there. Every clue modern science used to solve this case existed in 1888. The investigators simply lacked the tools to interpret what they were seeing. It makes you wonder what other historical mysteries are waiting for technology to catch up with the truth. The Ripper case reminds us that scientific advancement doesn't just help us understand the future, it helps us finally understand the past. And sometimes, that understanding is more disturbing than the mystery itself. What other historical mysteries do you think modern science could solve? The Jack the Ripper case shows us that time does not destroy evidence. It just makes it harder to read. From ancient murders to unexplained disappearances, there are countless cold cases waiting for the right technology to unlock their secrets. If this investigation into the intersection of history and science fascinated you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We love exploring how modern tools can shed new light on old mysteries, and your suggestions in the comments help guide our research. Drop a comment below with your favorite unsolved historical mystery, whether it's the princes in the tower, the Dyatlov Pass incident, or something from your own local history. Who knows? Your suggestion might be the next case we crack using the power of modern science. Until next time, remember that the truth is out there. Sometimes it just takes the right scientific tools to find it.